Welcome back to the Cap Report. How y'all doing? Hope y'all are doing great. I'm doing well. Per the usual, I'm late to the news, but in this video we're going over UFC 281 and 280 announcements. UFC 281 most recently, which is going to be in November in Madison Square Garden, had its main event announced, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira, the trilogy kind of. Pretty excited for this fight. It's got a cool narrative, these guys have history, and they match up pretty interestingly. Alex Pereira holds 2 wins over Israel Adesanya in Glory Kickboxing. He's the only man to knock him out in his career. I think people are kind of taking those results and kind of running away with it without really having looked at those fights at all. Having watched both of those fights, there's not really a single point where Pereira really ever was dominant. In the first fight, I will say it was closer than a lot of people probably say it was. I think Adesanya won that fight, but the rounds were pretty close. But you could kind of tell at the end that even Pereira was surprised that he won. In the second fight, Adesanya was dominating, but he got caught once on a counter and it was over. I'm going to use this as a segue, but it's interesting because people I've seen debate online a little bit, whether they're saying this fight, some people are saying, right, it's just a kickboxing fight in the UFC and MMA, and that there's going to be no difference between their old fights. It won't differ at all to their kickboxing fights. I think that's not true. There's differences in MMA striking and boxing and kickboxing striking, at least to an extent, right? The biggest difference, the glove sizes, 12 ounces versus 4 ounces. It means that the power lands through more, and certain defensive techniques aren't going to be as effective. Just different techniques in general that might work in kickboxing and boxing might not translate to MMA, and vice versa. Something you might be able to pull off in MMA might not translate over to boxing the same way. For example, showing up in the high guard. It isn't necessarily as effective in MMA because the gloves take up much less space. There's generally spacing available to land somewhere within it. It doesn't mean that it can't be used. You do still see guys use it, like Pereira, for example. But the point being is, it shows that there are differences within the striking. Both fighters can benefit from this. Pereira, in the power kind of translating more in the gloves, he's got so much power. His left hook is insane. And for Adesanya, I think that the size in the gloves actually, it lends to his defensive style more than Pereira, or the transition from the larger gloves to smaller gloves kind of benefits Adesanya because he uses a lot of head movement already, getting off the center line, pulls, that kind of stuff. He uses that a lot more in his defensive style, whereas Pereira in their fights, he would cover up with the gloves more. I think that this fight will be quite a chess match, with Pereira kind of being the aggressor in the old fights. You could see that, and Adesanya will take more of a counter-punching style. I'm really interested to see how Adesanya approaches this fight. There are people kind of saying like, oh, what if he pulls an Ngannou, like he pulls out a grappling master class out of nowhere, that we just had no idea about. But I don't think that'll be too likely. I think it should be noted that Alex Pereira trains with Glover Teixeira, so even if his experience is less than Adesanya in MMA, the level of grappling that he's training with is really high. The team around him is really great at that. So I don't see why Adesanya would lean towards that unless he was really confident. Both of these fighters have developed a ton since their previous fights, and I think that this fight will open as a real chess match. Both these guys, I think they'll be filling out the range a little bit, hand fighting, parrying a lot early. I think Izzy uses a lot more feints in this fight than their old ones. I feel like you didn't see that as much as you see in his game now. Pereira will definitely push the pressure more early on. I think by the second, third round, you'll see them trading quite a bit. I do see Pereira gassing a little late, and I think that Izzy will end up ultimately winning by decision. Right now, I'd probably lean Izzy 60-ish% for now. I'm pretty excited for this fight. I think that it's interesting because I don't think Adesanya has the range advantage that he's had in a lot of his previous fights, and I think that will also maybe make him be a little more active in the striking. I mean, this should be a good fight. I think it will probably be one of his better title fights that he's had in a while. Another fight that's being discussed and reported for UFC 281, but this one's yet to really be confirmed, is Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. Now, this fight is fireworks, just par for the course for Chandler at this point. I remember being kind of iffy about Chandler when he came into the UFC, especially with how quickly he got a title shot and whatnot. I actually kind of agreed with Poirier's stance on it, where he was kind of saying like, hey, I think he needs to fight a little more before he gets a title shot, which, hey, maybe we'll see a little bit of bad blood in this fight then. I think the UFC wanted to make this fight at one point for the vacated belt, but yeah, as we said kind of previously, Poirier thought that Chandler didn't really deserve the opportunity yet. Poirier ultimately ended up taking the McGregor trilogy, and Chandler fought and lost to Charles Oliveira for the belt. I think in how these two match up, there's a lot of similarities to the Poirier versus McGregor fights. This in that, Poirier definitely has a cardio advantage here, and that Chandler has more of a power and a kind of explosiveness advantage. Chandler, however, has a leaner striking game than McGregor, I'd say. He has a little less weapons in his arsenal. He does have an overall better skill set than McGregor, and a more complete game. Since this will be a 3-round fight, I do think that it actually kind of favors Chandler a lot more than a 5-rounder would. Personally, how I see this fight playing out, at least for now, I see a lot of boxing exchanges early on. I think Poirier might kind of feel a few of them a little more, like, I think you visually see him like feel some of those shots, but I think overall he'll land the better combinations. I think Chandler might win that round off of power in that sense, that he does a little more damage. In round 2, I think Chandler will slow down a bit, still have quite a bit of output, but I think that he'll get dropped by Poirier. And in the 3rd round, I'll see Poirier finishing it, kind of ramping up the pressure, getting Chandler against the cage, and throwing those endless combinations that he's so good at. I'd probably lean, 70-30 to Poirier for now, for how I kind of view this fight. And now, getting into some old news. Some stuff for UFC 280, which I never got a chance to talk about it, but, I want to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it. For UFC 280, which is in October, the announcements were made a couple weeks ago. It might have been a month ago at this point, honestly. Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the vacant lightweight title has been booked for UFC 280, October 22nd in Abu Dhabi. Interesting choice for place there. Been a lot of speculation on who these guys were going to fight next. At one point, it looked like Islam would be rebooked with Beneil Dariush, and Oliveira might chase the McGregor money himself. But this was the fight to make, and luckily the organization pulled through and made the right fight. Although the belt is vacant technically, it does feel as though much of the fans, I personally see it as Oliveira is still the champion. Oliveira's on an amazing run right now. He's running through and finishing the top guys of the division. Makhachev is just kind of beginning to reach the pinnacle of the division, so his wins do feel like they fall a little short of Oliveira somewhat, just because he hasn't beat the same level of guys, and he's not finishing the same level of guys either. This is a really intriguing matchup. Both of these guys are great grapplers, but in very different senses. Oliveira's powered by his BJJ game, and just that overall sense of grappling. He's such a danger to go to the ground with that people are scared to go to the ground with him. Makhachev has more of the whole Dagestani style wrestling. It's interesting because many people kind of debate what, Khabib versus Oliveira would have looked like, and I think this gives us a much better image of that. Makhachev, he trained with Khabib, and he's now coached by him. He implements a much more kind of controlling, powerful, dominating grappling style, which I'm really intrigued to see how it is countered by Oliveira's BJJ game, because Oliveira is great from his back. So even if he gets to that point, he's really good at attacking from the bottom position. It makes an interesting clash of styles that it's hard to kind of predict what's going to happen there. Standing up, I definitely think Oliveira is the better of the two and has a lot more options. His striking style is enhanced by the third of his ground game, which will likely be limited by Makhachev more than his previous opponents, just because the level of Makhachev's wrestling is a lot higher and stronger to Oliveira's previous opponents. For now, I'm going to favor Oliveira in this fight, but it's really close. And trying to visualize how this fight's going to go, it's really difficult for me. A lot more than the other two fights, just because I think that these guys' styles are so different and they clash in a way that, like, you don't know whose style is going to be dominant here. I think that early on, you're going to have Oliveira, he's going to pressure, but a lot more hesitantly than he normally does. You'll see a lot less kicks likely, just because I guess we'll see. Actually, I think that he'll throw less kicks. Maybe he'll still throw them. Maybe he's not afraid of Makhachev taking him to the ground. I think that Makhachev will be willing to try and stand with him for a little bit, but eventually he's going to see that Oliveira is the better striker there, and that eventually he's going to have to take to the ground. Maybe the first round doesn't go. I think that Oliveira maybe can stuff a takedown or two early on. Second round, a little bit the same approach, but Makhachev gets the fight to the ground. I think that maybe he'll win the earlier grappling exchanges just because of his style, and I think that it might take Oliveira some time to adjust to it. I'm going to say that by the third round, Makhachev will have got the fight to the ground again, but I think that Oliveira will be able to find a submission. So I'm going to lean Oliveira by submission. This fight's really close. I'm going like 55-45. In terms of how I see it for now, leaning to Oliveira. Following the announcement of the main event, there was a slew of fight announcements for this card, and it looks like it could be the best card of the year. 2 title fights, some real big names leading up to that. A lot of the fighters in similar divisions and who have recent history of fighting each other. The title fight between Aljamain Sterling and TJ Dillashaw has been moved to UFC 279. As the co-main, this should prove to be another interesting stylistic matchup. Sterling's coming off 2 kind of controversial wins over Iran and a dominant finish of Corey Sandhagen. In my opinion, Dillashaw doesn't really deserve this title shot. He beat Corey Sandhagen, heavy air quotes, and I don't think he won that fight. It was a very controversial fight, and that fight was coming off of a 2-year suspension, which saw him stripped of the title after testing positive for EPO. If you ask me, I think that Jose Aldo was much more deserving of the title shot than TJ Dillashaw, other than the fact that TJ Dillashaw is a big name. I mean, if you look at Aldo's run right now, he beat Chito Vera, which that win is aging amazingly, beating Rob Font and beating Pedro Munoz. He's on a pretty good run right now. And once again, he didn't win a fight that he should have lost. In terms of how these two match up, I think that Dillashaw will give Sterling a lot of issues standing up. I don't think that Sterling is a good enough striker to stand with Dillashaw the whole time. I think that Dillashaw will also give Sterling a little more issues on the ground than Jan did. I don't think Dillashaw will stuff as many takedowns, but I do think he will be more competent in defending a lot of stuff. Right now, for that fight, I'm honestly gonna lean 60-40 Dillashaw, but that fight, I'm really gonna have to go back and look at a lot of stuff before I really, when I go and like lay out my official predictions and whatnot. Another fight that I believe got finalized for this card, it was being reported, like it came out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere. Pereira versus Sean O'Malley. Number 1 versus number 11, kind of wild. Seems like too early for O'Malley, who struggled to find really anything against Pedro Munoz in his last fight. There are some factors that kind of appear to make this maybe a better time for these two to match up for the sake of O'Malley and the UFC, who's kind of pushing O'Malley here. This fight's gonna be a 3-round fight, which is huge because Jan is a fighter who gets better as the fight goes, and his style sort of fits the 5-round fights more than 3-rounders. So for O'Malley, it's a lot better in that sense. Jan's all controversial fights in a row, so maybe there's a chance to catch him in a slump here. That being said, unless O'Malley finds kind of a flash knockout with his combination of power and range early on, I think that Jan kind of wins this fight easily. Just because, I mean, if we look at it, I don't think that O'Malley presents really almost any more issues to Jan or problems or questions to be solved than Corey Sandhagen did. It took Jan a bit to beat him. It went to decision, but if Jan can beat Sandhagen, I don't see how O'Malley beats him. Like right now I'm leaning like 80, 85, 15 to Jan for this fight. But, if O'Malley does, it's a great fight for O'Malley to take because if he loses, he lost Peter Yan, he's supposed to lose that fight. If he wins the fight, he beat Peter Yan, he shoots up the rankings, probably gets a title shot faster than he deserves, and you know what I mean? It could almost put him on a McGregor-like run. You know what I mean? That being said, I think a lot of the top 5 beats O'Malley at bantamweight. So there's a couple other fights being worked on for this card. Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady has been confirmed. And being ranked at 5th, Bilal's been putting a nice string of wins together, and he could even push for a title fight in the future if he keeps winning. Since everyone ahead of him lost to Usman, unless maybe Leon Edwards beats him this week. I'd favor Bilal in this fight for now by decision over Sean Brady. Probably like a solid 70-30. But no, Dariush versus Matej Gamrot is also in the works. Dariush has run up a sizable win streak as well. He had been matched up with Makhachev, but the fight fell through, and then Makhachev moved on to beat Bobby Green and is now fighting for the title. Gamrot's coming off a controversial win over Arman Tsarukyan, and depending on how this fight goes, it could begin, the ushering in of a new era of lightweights with, Matej Gamrot, Rafael Fiziev, Arman Tsarukyan, and others. For that fight, I'm leaning Gamrot, honestly, 65-35. And then one last piece of news I'll touch on. This isn't very big, but I think it's really cool. For UFC 283, the UFC is returning to Brazil. They're going to Rio in January, which is awesome. And I wonder who they could fit onto this card. And I really hope that they can stack it. Oliveira fights in October, so I don't think it would be likely to see him on that card. I imagine we'll see Figueiredo versus Moreno 4 on it. Maybe we can get Yuri versus Glover on it. They can make it on there, unless they use them for 282. But I'm thinking about making a video on like building a UFC 283 Return to Brazil card. I think that's really awesome. I hope they stack it up. I want to see Aldo on that card. He's fighting Marab this week, so I think it's a timetable fast enough for him to return. Oh, dang. It would have been awesome to see him maybe fight for a title on that, but it is what it is. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. As always, even though no one does leave comments, leave any comments, on what you thought of the video, any of this news, any of these fights. You like them? You don't think they're the right move? Think they were? Any predictions for them early on? Leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. It's really awesome to see that the videos are starting to do a lot better. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty disheartening when you put like a couple hours into making a video and gets 10 views. But the last one we hit 1,000 for the first time, which is amazing, by the way. As always, I appreciate everything. This has been the Cap Report. See y'all next time.